Hello everybody, this is my buddy Roy's 2019 Ford Mustang GT. Now it's only been a few short months since I last drove a Mustang GT, and my hasn't the world changed. But I am not simply driving this just to relive the good old days when we could, hug people. Oh no. Roy has convinced me that there is enough different about his car compared with the one that I drove to make it worthwhile revisiting the car in a fairly short space of time. So what is actually different? Well, this is essentially the facelifted Mustang. It was introduced in America in 2018 and came to British shores in 2019. He picked this up last year at Christmas time when Ford were doing some very attractive deals. And he got very, very lucky with this car because it is, in his words, essentially a Bullet without the Bullet price tag. The Bullet, as you might have guessed it, is another nod to that famous car from the old Steve McQueen film. However, this particular vehicle has three key options that were must-haves for Roy. He wanted the MagnaRide suspension option, he wanted a manual gearbox, and these lovely Recaro seats. So let's talk about those. The manual is an improved version of the 6-speed that I drove before, and it is pretty nice. The shift action is short, it's a very, very good gearbox to use, and the weighting of all the controls feel a little bit more natural than in the previous car. The brake pedal is far too eager. Those big 6-pot piston calipers at the front have no trouble whatsoever stopping the car, but they've also got a point to prove. They are desperate to impress you and tell you how good they are at stopping the car. And it's a little bit tiresome. The MagnaRide suspension option is a big one. Not a particularly expensive option at about £1,700 or so I'm told, but an important one because this totally changes the way that the car rides. The last one that I drove, which was on standard suspension with lowering springs, had this odd combo of being too stiff and too soft all at the same time. Quite an achievement really. This is certainly at low speeds a lot better, generally more resolved. The Recaro seats I have no complaints with whatsoever. Ford seem to habitually get their seats exactly right. Now I'd love to say that at these speeds it's me doing all that lovely heel and toe action, but this car has auto rev matching. And I have to say, I didn't find shifting gear when in a hurry a very easy or enjoyable thing in the other Mustang, so for once I'm very happy to have the functionality. Now this car is not short of adjustability or customization. Very typical for many American cars, you've got a million different things that you can measure on the dash here. I've got inlet air temp, cylinder head temp, air fuel ratio, the vacuum, battery voltage, everything you could possibly want. It's a little bit mad. This car has, as standard, a digital display. Now that is an option back in the USA, but not here, and it's a pretty nice display too. Very sharp, very clear, and there's a number of different modes you can use it in. You can also have the display set independently of what mode you're actually driving in, which is very nice. I've got it in a very track-orientated setup at the moment, which is showing me the car's newer and higher 7,400 RPM redline. It's an improved engine, it has direct and port injection, and it's actually been putting out some pretty impressive numbers, and not just power either. This car's up a little bit on the old one, putting out now 450 PS, that's 444 brake, which is not quite as good as the Americans get, but has closed the gap versus the old car, which is quite a bit down on US spec power. The number that in fact is really impressing me is the fuel economy. Now I know Roy's been on the motorway a lot this morning, but he's achieved nearly 35 to the gallon. Yet another car that begs the question, do we really need to downsize? As you might spot, he's currently following me in my S2000, and I'd struggle to beat his fuel economy figures. I really would. There are some cosmetic tweaks to the Mustang as well, and people that know the model much better than me will be able to point those out, but they include a different front end treatment and a slightly lower bonnet, which is better for seeing out. In fairness, overall it's not a marked improvement, but if you want a Mustang you want to be able to see the bonnet, and you certainly can in this. It's quite a complex shape too when you're sat back here. It's not a bad place to spend some time. There's a lot of really nice details as well. Some nice leatherish with a bit of fake stitching stuff down here. And Ford clearly are putting in the effort to try and make this a nicer place to be. Not so sure about the indicator, which makes the sound of a heartbeat. While the ride is definitely an improvement, it's still not what I'd really describe as a particularly supple car. And while we're at low speeds, let's talk you through some of the more unusual modes and features that this car has. You have a lot of stuff here for the drag racing community. And for those people, they probably wouldn't go with this 6-speed manual. They'd go with the new 10-speed auto. It's apparently very, very fast, but of course not anywhere near as engaging as this. Now you've got line lock, which means that on command you can do a burnout, and there's even a special drag race mode here which will really soften up the dampers at the back, letting you get the absolute best launch. I mean, it's American, why wouldn't you, right? It's a car that feels like it's going very, very fast, even when you're only doing about 40 or 50 mile an hour. That's partly its size and weight, and the controls still take a little bit of getting used to. The steering doesn't have the most feel, but it's quite quick. Now let's see how punchy that engine is from low RPM. In third gear at a minute. It's still not a torque monster. It really needs revs, and Roy has told me that at some point in this review I absolutely must get it to the full 7400, and I will do that because I am that sort of friend. Now all of the options and things can be set by pressing the little Mustang icon down here, and you can even have my mode, which is their way of saying individual settings, and Roy has it set to everything in normal but the exhaust, which he sets to track. This car being fitted, as so many are now, with a petrol particulate filter means that it's not going to sound quite as raucous as Mustangs of old, but it certainly does its best. And let's face it, no matter what you do to a big old naturally aspirated V8, they always want to sound nice. So I'm going to change things up a bit now. I'm going to set it into Sport Plus, just because I can. Yeah, Sport Plus, very, very firm. Very firm indeed. I thought for a second that I spotted a warning light on the dash, but it was in fact the gear indicator icon, which is very bright and actually quite distracting. It's a bright green little thing down here. Very annoying. That's bad whoever at Ford decided to put that there, because I know the idea is you're supposed to pay attention to it, but come on, if I wanted to save money on fuel, I would have bought a Prius. And those who know my most recent car purchase will know that it's not a Prius. Now, one of the benefits of track mode, which I'm now in, of course perfectly appropriate for a small, sleepy little village, is the fact that it then makes the throttle perfectly linear. It's mapped 0 to 100% with the throttle travel, and that I like. More manufacturers should do that, and in fact, I'd like throttle options to be individual settings on more cars, because it really should be. Now let's hop down another gear and see what she sounds like in second. And I want to enjoy this one myself. Oh, you really do need to rev it out to get the best from it. Yeah, that suspension's still not great. But then I am in track mode, so let's set it not into drag mode, not into snow wet mode. Let's set it into Roy's mode. I think he probably has made the right decision with having his mode set up the way that he has. Oh, it's still a very daunting car. Now I know that if you measured it, this isn't really that much bigger, if at all, than something like a BMW M4. But the fact is, the M4 is also too big a car to enjoy on roads like this. Now, I must say I was hoping the Magnaride might have had something of a more transformative effect on the car's suspension, but there's still that real firmness to it, and it can be hustled. It certainly can. I just don't know why they've got it set up this way. I really, really don't. The chassis is clearly perfectly capable, and the engine is magnificent. And it pulls really hard when you get to the top end. I mean, really seriously hard. Very, very impressive. But the whole package still feels somewhat disconnected. The steering wants to be quite darty and lively, and I'm not sure the suspension's too keen on it. There's still that element of a little bit too much roll, but also just being a bit too stiff. I want to like this car. I mean, I love looking at it. The minute I pulled up for the review today, it looked so good, and yet it's just not quite there. A very incohesive package. And this is such a shame, because I've come off the back of driving a nearly new Camaro SS, and that was a real positive surprise, and I was expecting that to be awful. And maybe that's where I went wrong. I was expecting something really great from this car, and it's just not delivering it. It's not a bad car, not in the least, and it's still capable of tackling these roads at some serious speeds, but it just doesn't feel particularly enjoyable. It feels in some ways like doing it in my 7 Series or my old S-Class, in that it can do it, but I don't feel like this is what it wants to do. If you told me this was a Japanese spec car, I'd believe you, because the suspension is that level of firmness. The whole point of a Magna-Ride setup is that it doesn't have to be that way. I just don't get it. It does make me genuinely look back with fondness on those older muscle cars that I drove recently. They seemed a little bit more honest somehow. They knew what they were, and they weren't really trying to pretend to be anything else. They were just a lot of noise, a bit of forward momentum, and less said about the corners, the better, really. That is the Ford Mustang. It really pains me to say this, but if you can live with left-hand drive and you want a performance American car, get a Camaro. I just said that, didn't I? Oh well. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.